You're listening to What Were You Thinking? With Eric Paxton Dickerson, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Eric McCoy, and welcome back to What Were You Thinking? So I have my new co-host today, and this is my wife, Mirella McCoy.
Hello.
I'm very excited to have her here today. And just for informative purposes, our anniversary is tomorrow. We got 5 years married, and as far as I'm concerned, it's the only way for me to have done that was to be clean and sober.
Only way, yeah.
And then actually the following day after that is my 7 years clean and sober. And so that's, I wanted to actually talk today about the topic that I know more than anything, and it is addiction. And the reason I wanted to talk about it today was because my wife, I dragged her into the nightmare of addiction. When I met her, I had 11 years clean and sober. I owned a business. Everything was great. Everything was wonderful. And I kind of moved outside of that business, and then I decided to do something very dumb. And so I did end up relapsing, but she had an opportunity to see a nightmare, I think, that she never even knew existed.
Yeah, correct. It was. And just for understanding purposes, this was before we got married, and I still married him. So that goes to show that there's improvement, right, in everybody.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you real quick on that. My one of my big goals in what I do in general, obviously with my podcast, High Wall Clean, and obviously even with this show, is to look at and fight the stigma of substance abuse. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of hatred out there towards people that have drug and alcohol problems. And, one of the things that people look at is, again, as drug abusers, it is weakness. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on that.
Do I think it's weakness?
Yeah.
To begin using drugs?
To be stuck using drugs? Absolutely
not. I don't think it's a weakness at all. I think it becomes in an addict's mind, the only thing that will keep them from being able to survive in life. And there is no other alternative, right? I think that some addicts are actually one of the strongest people, you included, that are able to overcome the strength that addiction has over you.
Yeah, so the book that I wrote, Pain, Failure, and Misery Are the Stepping Stones to Success, one of the main reasons I wrote this book was to hopefully kind of educate people on addiction, and especially all of those people that really don't truly understand the immense power that it ultimately has on you. And I teach at a school, and I've brought this up before, New Creation College, where we work where I get an opportunity to educate people that are working to become substance abuse counselors. And of course, one of the topics that we talk about is physiological effects, pharmacology and physiological effects of drugs and alcohol. And I remember when I originally studied this, and being somebody that had that drug dependency issue, it made sense to me. It really, really made sense to me, because it's a battle between, we were talking about this in the car, it's a battle between the old brain and the new brain. Mm-hmm. The old brain is the survival part of the brain. And I had done a podcast recently with a friend of yours, guy that you know, Jason. Thank you. And we talked about methamphetamine. Of course, methamphetamine was
mine
and yours. And the power and the differences, and I really do see a lot of differences between methamphetamine and other substances, just in the sense of doing something that doesn't seem to be a problem.
Right. Absolutely.
And, I started methamphetamine many, many years ago, back when it was definitely very different than what you find today. And it was very powerful. And so I remember putting this in my body, and I could not find a single bad thing about it. Gave me focus, concentration. I had energy. I was, everything that it gave me was good. There was nothing bad about it. And that's where the problem lies.
Right. And that's where a lot of people, and kind of we talked about this before too, where in the schools they're talking about don't do drugs are bad for you. And then you have somebody who tries it, especially meth, right? Tries it and they're like, what the hell are these people talking about?
They're full of shit.
This is amazing. I feel amazing. I can get through. And that is not when the addiction starts, right? Like you could do it on occasion or, whatever, but that euphoria you feel, that I'm the top of the world, all your problems are gone, all that stuff is what leads to that addiction. That's not because of weakness.
No.
That is because of the fact that it started out amazing.
And that is what addiction is.
Right.
I mean, if nobody's going to do a substance that feels horrible and is ultimately a miserable experience and continue to do it.
Right, absolutely.
And of course there is the difference between even that with looking at heroin. Heroin, a lot of times you feel nauseous, it knocks you out, it puts you to sleep, things like that. And so there are what some people could say, okay, maybe there are some negative aspects to this.
Right.
You get drunk, you get highly intoxicated, you throw up, all these different things. But meth didn't do that.
Right. It doesn't.
And that's the scary part. And by the time you realize that it's a problem, your body is dependent upon it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can tell just in listening to our stories, right? The type of addict I was versus the type of addict you were.
She was way worse than I was.
Lies, all lies. One thing you need to know about Eric is he is a liar. Just kidding. No, it's the levels of addiction is incredible when you realize that you really see somebody who's really like, I guess you hit that rock bottom and doesn't know how to get out of it versus somebody who thinks like I did, I've got it under control. I got a job. I'm taking care of my kids. I'm managing it, but yet didn't really realize that I couldn't get up in the morning without getting high. Right. My body needed that to be able to function, right? Was I doing crimes? Was I running around the streets? No. There is some drug addicts that do that. Case in point, So in my mind, it wasn't a weakness. I didn't need it. I can quit anytime. I just don't want to quit, right? But in actuality, yeah, my body needed it.
Yeah, we were kind of discussing, looking at the differences between obviously people's behaviors and actually who they are as a person,
right,
and how they really drastically can change.
Right.
And I will attest to that,
as I will.
from my personal standpoint. I don't know if I've said it on this show, but I've said it on, my High Walk Clean podcast that, when I'm clean and sober, I'll give you the shirt off my back. I'll do anything for you. I will help you. I'll drive long way distance to, assist you in any way that you need. And you put that meth into my body, and I changed instantaneously. I will rob from you. I will steal from you. And she unfortunately had an opportunity to witness the nightmare that surrounds me, I guess you could say, while I'm on methamphetamine. I did commit an average of 10 residential burglaries a night. I define a lot of this stuff in my book, and I kind of talk about everything that revolves around this. But I become that epitome of, and it's not, and what's interesting is, even though so much of that time is very foggy in my head, everything was about just making sure that I had my supply, just making sure that I had what I needed to make sure that I had the drugs and continue the drugs. Yeah,
we, Eric and I have been doing a lot of TV watching, right? Because of this pandemic, as you all know. And we started watching this show called Supernatural, which is now I think almost over, but it's 15 seasons long. So if you've seen it, you've seen the season where one of the main characters, Sam,
loses his soul.
I would attest that Eric had no soul when he was out getting clean, or getting clean, getting high. And that is the best way that I can describe. If I had met Eric when he was getting high first, prior to meeting him, I wouldn't have given him the time of day. I fell in love with somebody who was clean and sober and had so much ambition and so much, just tons of goals, and he wanted to do so many things. And when he relapsed, unfortunately, I relapsed with him. But slowly did I start to see his soul leave his body. I could see in his eyes the pain that the conflict he was having, but the person he was slowly dying. And yeah, it was a pretty tough 6 months. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was. Now, so I want to ask you a question, because, you have a different perspective on the addictive aspects. Now, if we were to kind of compare and contrast the addiction level that you have versus
what you have,
the addiction, and again, yours is far worse than mine. I was kidding.
Maybe you're right, because I was able to hide it a lot better.
There you go.
Right? Yeah. I mean,
no, but I wanted to ask you a question regarding any insight that you might have into why can some people do it and others can't? Why can some people, be able to do less of it, to be able to stop, versus people like me that never went to sleep? I mean, I did methamphetamine until I passed out. I would go into like states of psychosis in a sense.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just your mindset and not your mental mindset, but your body chemistry, right? Like, I think there's people out there that body chemistry is so different that their bodies react differently to even Tylenol, right? So prime example, you can take something on an empty stomach. I can't. As soon as I take something on an empty stomach, I feel like I gotta vomit, like Tylenol or ibuprofen or whatever. And so I think a lot of it has to do just with our chemistry. So I think that's where people start to believe that they that are not addicts or, family of an addict, that it's a weakness, right? I think that's where they start to believe that it's a weakness. It's not. We don't know how our bodies are going to react. You have so many people who don't want to do the vaccine for COVID, right? That they're anti-vaxxers because they're afraid of how their bodies are going to react. I mean, there's other
Sure.
underlying issues to that, but
Other agendas
to that, but they're just they're not sure how the body's going to react, and so they don't want to do it, right? So they're skeptical. Well, when you do meth for the first time or you do heroin for the first time, you don't know if your body's going to react the same way as your best friend down the street who's doing it too. And so this is what I realized when we both relapsed together, right? Is your body reacted completely different than mine. I was able to take sleep every night. I didn't have that craving to stay up. I didn't have that need to stay up and, do crimes or even stay up and, clean the house. It was like, okay, I put the kids to bed. I stayed up and did whatever around the house. And then I ended up falling asleep, so it was, that need for me was not the same as the need for you.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an interesting concept, and I think it's important for everybody to think about. Just because something happens to you in a certain way does not necessarily mean that it happens to everybody else.
Right.
And I think that's part of where like the hatred comes into play, or you have the people that have done cocaine for a little bit of time, then they're able to stop. Sigmund Freud was a great example, right?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of cocaine, come up with some crazy theories, Oedipus complex, and
right.
And then he was able to stop, right?
Well, we talked also about cigarettes. I mean, just plain cigarettes.
Right.
Eric's a big smoker. I smoked with him, and when I said, all right, I want to stop, I stopped. I don't have that that need for the nicotine the way that Eric does, or the way another smoker might. So, and I have friends that are social smokers. They only have a cigarette or two when they're out drinking, and so their bodies are different than, my body chemistry, or what my needs are in my chemistry is different than the needs that your chemistry has, right? The funny thing is, it always ends up being, it always ends up turning into being an addiction, regardless of how our body chemistry reacts, right? So I realized I ended up having a problem. I hit my rock bottom. You hit your rock bottom, and we got there taking different paths, but we ended up on the same.
We ended up in the same place, which we did.
Right.
I had a much more difficult path.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, too, had to do, I think, with the amount I was doing.
Yes.
Buying it by the quarter pound, I was, slamming over an 8-ball a day, even 4 into 5 grams a day, which definitely makes your body become physically dependent. And, the difference between, a lot of people think, oh, the physical dependence, heroin, but no, methamphetamine creates a tissue dependency just like any other drug. It neuroplasticity changes the way your body works. And then it gets to a place where it requires the drug to function, to be able to do anything, to be able to get up. And so there is that dependency. And that's where, and I always like to say, and I always say that drugs are fun when you choose to do them, but when you have to, the fun's gone.
The fun's gone.
And at that point in time, your tolerance is way up. You're not really getting the pleasure anymore from it. You're just doing it to ultimately maintain. Again, the way our educational, you were talking about with the teaching of kids. And, I have said this before. I don't know. I said this on here, but I've had this idea, and I'll say this on here. I've had this idea, and I have actually reached out to the governor of California. I get absolutely zero response.
Right,
I've
crickets.
been trying to get a hold of this guy for a long time just to at least get a fuck you email back, but I don't get anything. I've reached out to, other legislative people and, don't really seem to get any response. But, and the idea that I have is I know will never work. I know they'll never go for, right? But my mentality and idea is that I want to go into a school and I just want to look at the kids and I just want to say, let's get high. I love to get high. Not on drugs, right? But I love to get high. To be able to set up a huge event somewhere. We could run it like the rave, where you if anybody ever remembers old school raves, they'd go talk to one person and have to talk to another person, then go talk to this person and to get the directions to the
To the rave.
to the actual place. But to do something like that in a way to show people what highness really is. Highness comes from within. It's not, you don't get high on drugs. We get high on our own chemicals, and that's the premise of it. And that's the exciting thing about it.
Well, like I said, it goes back to, we've had this discussion before, right? The more that we say drugs are bad, the more that we say sex is bad to our youth, the more they're going to want to do it. So let's be honest with them, right? Let's be honest and say, yeah, no, when you first start doing drugs, it feels amazing. But nobody has started doing drugs and have come out on the other side like rainbows and sunshine. Okay, they've had to struggle, right? And teach them about the physiological effects of meth, of heroin, or this is what could happen to you, right? Be honest with our children. I think that's what our biggest problem is, right? And sex is the same way. People, hate Planned Parenthood. As you know, I work for Planned Parenthood. I am a advocate for them. And to me, it's because so many of our children in the world right now are afraid to go to their parents and talk to them about the feeling of wanting to have sex. It's not unnatural. It is an absolute natural feeling to have a sexual desire, sexual cravings. It's okay, but they're so afraid to go to their parents that they come to Planned Parenthood to have that safe discussion with a clinician or provider about their options, right? And so they're so afraid to even go back in and say, okay, so I didn't listen to you tell me when you said not to have sex, and I did, and now I'm pregnant. Now what do I do? So then you have a whole bunch of other things. It's the same. So and drugs are the same way, right? The more you tell your kids, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, they're gonna do it.
Well, and I was thinking about this recently too, is that, as I was saying, when I started doing methamphetamine, it felt good. Everything was good. Everything was positive, right? And I literally believed in my mind that this was going to be like this forever.
Yeah,
That
do.
I can do it today, it's going to be like this. I'll do it tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. It's going to feel the same. But I was never educated on that. I mean, and I don't know if any would have changed, but knowing me, probably not. But the reality being is that, there was never any education in that. What was the education? Just say no.
Right.
Right.
It's just say no.
Just saying no again. It fails to take into account the mind's desire to want to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to understand. And especially as kids, you can say no, I say yes. I mean, that was the way I was.
Yeah.
You say no, I say yes. You say yes, I say no.
Right. And a lot of rebellious teens are that way. And so the more you're saying no, the more they're going to want to do it. Mm-hmm. Right. And at the end of the day, there comes a point, right, where they're no longer listening to the parents. Mm-hmm. They're listening to their buddies.
Yeah.
So I could say no till I'm blue in the face, but their buddy says, you know what, my mom said it's cool. Right. Or, you know what, let's go do this. And they're going to listen to them. They're not going to listen to the parents anymore. And that was a cruel reality for me raising 3 boys, mm-hmm. right? And I always told my oldest, don't do drugs. I never said because drugs were bad. I said, don't do drugs because your grandparents were addicts, your parents were addicts. It's in your blood to become an addict. So don't even try it. It's not even worth the risk, right? I thought I was being smart.
But he did anyways.
Yeah, I thought I was being smart, right? By being honest with him and being like, it's just not a good thing to start because and did he listen to me? No, he did what he wanted. And knows that he was living on the streets for, as far as I know, about a year, and, lost touch with him for 6 months. Didn't know where he was at. And, thank God that he was able to get himself out of it. And I'm super proud of him. And Alex, if you're listening, Mom loves you. It doesn't matter how much you say, no, don't do it, or how you mm-hmm. tell them, right? The choice is theirs. They're gonna make it, right? And the more you tell them it's taboo and that it's horrible and that I don't even want to talk about it, just don't do it because I'm your mother and listen to me, right. the more likelihood that you're going to fall into that trap.
And I have an issue with just all the parents out there that are like, well, this is just the parents' responsibility. This is the parents' responsibility to teach. What about the parents that are using drugs? Mm-hmm. What about the kids that are being molested by their parents?
Or the absentee parents, right?
Or the absentee parents, and that's where I think there should be a combination of, that I think it's completely selfish for all the parents, let's say that are good parents, that say, oh, we just need to all do this at home and not do it in school. Think about those that are getting screwed up. Mm-hmm. Think about all the kids out there that are living with parents that are doing drugs, that are doing alcohol, that are raping their kids sometimes, mm-hmm. And which we'll get into another episode because my wife actually has an amazing story with her upbringing related to mm-hmm. this topic, and so we'll get into that at another time. Hey, I want to point out real quick that if anybody is interested in calling, we definitely want to know what you were thinking. What were you thinking? The phone number is area code 323-203-0815. Again, 323-203-0815.
Yeah, we'd love to hear their thoughts on, do you think that drug addiction is a weakness?
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear what people have to say about it, and not just because you've been on drugs, but maybe your perspective of somebody who hasn't been on drugs before and why they feel it's a weakness, right?
We live in in our society today, we have different views of this illness, right? Mm-hmm. You've got the disease, the disease idea, that it is a disease. And the interesting thing about that is you have all these treatment programs that teach it's a disease, but they don't treat it as a disease.
Right. You're right.
Right?
Right.
You relapse, we throw you out.
Mm-hmm.
They do not treat you as if you have an illness. They treat you as if it's a behavior.
Right.
Right. And, and looking at you are a bad person sometimes. I
Right.
mean, I've worked at a lot of different treatment programs, and the views of the clinicians and the people that work there make it, I think, honestly, difficult for people who want to stay.
There's a lot of judgment, right? And especially when they have clinicians or therapists that are there that do not have that history. And this is why the drug and alcohol counselors are so important, because most of the time they have that history. They are empathetic to what you're feeling because they have felt it too, right? But there is that. There's not a really good way to say, okay, this is a disease, so we're going to treat it like a disease. There's no medication you can take that's going to cure this disease, right? So it becomes a strength that you have to pull through, and it is. And I think that people fail to understand it is not easy. So you have probably heard many stories of addicts who've come in to get clean, they fail. They come in to get clean, they fail. I mean, my own son, I think, went into rehab maybe 5 times, right? And then was there, starting to look really good, getting better, and off he went, right? I don't think that's a weakness. I think that's a fear, right? They got so used to living this life of chaos.
Well, it goes to the idea, like, number one is, do they want to get clean?
Right.
I mean, that's
that's the other.
That's the one side. And I'll say honestly, like with smoking, I like smoking. I mean, it's bad for you. It's unhealthy. I like smoking, and so that's where the challenge comes into it for me.
Right.
My addiction, of course, and especially after my relapse, I mean, I went down quick. I mean, I went from up here to below the.
It was definitely not a gradual
decline.
No.
It was bad. It was quick. It was brutal. I got kicked in the head. I literally had to get kicked in the head. And I literally did get kicked in the head.
Did.
And this is something I like to tell people too, is that, and I honestly, to tell you the truth, if I can do it twice, I know you can do it once, because I had to go through that. Now, granted, the first time that I took it seriously back in 2002, I was in custody. So that sort of
helped push you.
Kept me locked down long enough to be able to get it out of my system and help with the cravings. But that is the suffering, is the cravings. That's the true suffering.
Right.
I teach Dr. Kevin McCauley, right? He did the video.
Drunk in Public?
No. What's the video he did? He did. Anyways, I can't remember. But anyways, he used to be the medical director of Sober Living by the Sea, and he's always educated on the disease concept. And is addiction really a disease? And so he uses Horvas Dilemma. They call it Horvas Dilemma as the best argument against addiction being a disease, right? And what it says is that addiction is a choice. True diseases do not involve choice. At times, the addict can summon the willpower to not use, while the diabetic cannot.
Yeah.
And that's true.
That's very true.
But the one thing that it fails to take into account is cravings. And cravings are the true suffering of the addict.
It's the memory, right? Like,
well, it's it's not only like the mental memories,
it's the physical memory.
but it becomes physical. I correlated it one time. I talked about, I think I don't know, one of my other shows, I was talking about the correlation between food. Okay, so food, between we have this old brain and we have the new brain. The old brain is the pleasure part of the brain. It's the nucleus accumbens, a specific part. And that is the pleasure, the reinforcing part of the brain. When you do something that feels good, you naturally want to do it again and continue doing it. And so it's a survival thing. When you take a shit, you get a release of dopamine. It's a reality.
It's true.
It's a survival thing, right? When you eat food, you get a release of dopamine. When you're thirsty, you drink water and you go, and you get that like feeling, right? That,
especially on those hot days, yeah.
That's dopamine, right? That's giving you that feeling. Now, that survival process, we need to remember, okay? Because if we didn't have memory, then we would go through that thirst, whatever thing, and we would have no idea how to satiate that.
Absolutely, right.
So we have this memory, which is actually the amygdala, which is the emotional memory, and And so, and this is also the part of the brain where, again, like traumatic events get stored. You're in a car accident, you know, that memory gets ingrained in the amygdala, and then you're driving in the car and then somebody puts on the brakes too quickly and you're like, you know, gotta grab everything,
I think
you
he's
know.
mentioning what had just happened about an hour ago when you were driving.
And so that memory, right? And so because of your drug use, which is sitting on the survival part of the brain, that's exactly what you're doing, is the survival. That drug becomes, no, it's not. But within us, that's the belief that we ultimately have, that's in our unconscious part of the brain, the old part of the brain we don't have any control over.
Right.
That's your emotional stuff. You do have control over your emotions, but you know, your limbic system, your emotions, you know, the pleasure part of the brain, the fight or flight aspect comes from that, right? And so when you do these things, and so with food, you eat food, that you're hungry, that ghost switch kicks on in the old part of the brain, you start eating food. Once you hit the satiation point, you're full. The stop switch, which is in your prefrontal cortex, which is the cognitive part of your brain, kicks in, and you stop eating. Okay. For some reason, there's a broken part to this system, and that ghost switch doesn't shut off.
It doesn't turn off, right?
And so, but you also have all of this memory. So, you know, when I went to Tarzana Treatment Center, which was the most difficult thing for me to do, was I was literally fighting and screaming all the way there.
You slept most of the way there, but I'm sure
Trying
in
to
your mind you
trying
were...
to stick a needle in my arm that
Oh yes, I remember.
And so, but we get there, and you know, and I want to say this to all the people out there that, you know, are really, really struggling with drug abuse. And I know, unfortunately, a lot of the people that I would like to be talking to are probably not listening to this show.
Right.
And as I always say that on my podcast too, a lot of the people probably aren't listening to the podcast, but
there's
the ones that I
it will get
like
to them when they're ready. Yeah.
But for those people, you know, I understand the difficulty. I understand how difficult it is to get off of it. You know, methamphetamine, it's the depression. The depression is so intense and so immense. It's almost to the level of suicidal.
Right.
You know, I am, you know, your emotional stability goes away. You know, I'm crying at Hallmark commercials. I mean, anything, just start breaking into tears.
Oh yeah.
Why the hell am I feeling this? I've been numb for months and years. And
It
all of a sudden,
flush is black. It's like the dam broke. The absolute dam broke.
and you don't feel good, and you go, I know what'll fix this.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem lies, you know, and that's, I know what's going to fix this. And then all of a sudden, none of this seems to matter anymore. You know, that's the reality. I tell, you know, my students all the time, you know, the funny thing with treatment too is, you know, we have people coming in to work on a problem they don't think they have, to learn from people they don't think they're going to learn from.
Right. It's absolutely,
Right?
it's true. And so again, you know, you go through all these struggles, right? You go through this, you try to get clean, and then you get the memory and you go, I know exactly what I can do to fix this problem.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So let's say you finally get past that. You finally get past the depression. All right, I'm getting to the point where I can start picking up the pieces, and you're driving down the street, maybe to a job interview or something like that, you know, just something to start picking up your feet, and you feel the urge of the feeling physically of how great or how physically amazing that drug made you feel.
Yep.
Right? You can literally taste it in your mouth at times.
You can.
Right?
Yep.
And
that's where the relapse is
and
happening,
that's when you're
you know?
like, driving your car bound. I wonder if this guy's number still works,
Yep.
right? And so, again, not a weakness. You are literally fighting your own body
You are. Yeah.
to try to get to a better place in life, right?
Yep. And I don't believe, you know, I teach my counselors this too. It's like, you know, let's eliminate ever using the word denial, right? They're in denial, because denial honestly is an excuse for clinicians not to work very hard. They don't have to work very hard. You're in denial. Let's just roll with that. You're in denial, right? If I could actually help people see the reality behind their situation, then they're not in denial anymore, you know?
Right.
But again, it goes back to, I can't tell anybody anything. There's nothing I can say to anybody without them seeing it for themselves.
Right, and you can't, yeah, you definitely can't make anybody do that. And I know that oh too well, having a child who, has gone through addiction.
Two.
Well, you and my oldest. Yes, and our other son, our stepson, or my stepson. But no matter how much you try,
No, I was saying me.
Oh, so you and my stepson and my son, so 3. So wow.
I was pretty much a child back, when
you really were.
I was pretty much a baby.
I just gotta say this, okay? I'm not saying I'm the reason why Eric got clean, okay? But the last day that I picked him up before he left to go to the treatment center, I was moving out. It was done. We were leaving. I packed up my kids. We're out of here. I wasn't about to lose my kids. I had to get clean myself, change my number, the whole 9 yards. He was supposed to meet up with his parents. His mother calls me and says, "Do you know where Eric's at?" And I said, "I don't know. It's over between us. He's probably out." And she said, "Well, he was supposed to meet us," which I knew he wasn't going to meet them. I was absolutely sure he wasn't going to meet them. And I'm with my best friend in the car. We're trying to pack up my apartment, get out. I get off the phone and I looked at her and I said, "I'm going to call him and I'm going to guarantee you the first thing that will come out of his mouth is there's no reason for me to get clean if you're leaving me." And I called you pick up the phone. I said, "Hey, your mom's trying to get a hold of you. What are you doing?" "Well, I'm not about to get clean since you decided to leave me." And I was like, "You are like a 2-year-old child."
Pretty much.
And so that just kind of reminded me of that story when you said you were the other child, because it's true. I could not believe that, of course it was,
Well, and that's the problem with the flip side of drugs. I mean, it's taken over your brain, also affected you,
Mm-hmm.
and so, your ability to think clearly, to make good decisions, all of that stuff goes away.
Mm-hmm. Well,
know.
and to my point, it's a blame game. Everybody else is making a big deal about your drug addiction. I'm fine. I don't have a drug addiction. Okay, you all are the ones that have the problem.
Right.
And so mentally, you can't believe that you are the problem, right? Everybody else, just leave me alone. I'm an adult. I can do my own thing, right? And so, so that's another aspect to it as well. Until you are able to really be truthful with yourself and say, "I have a problem." No matter how many people around you tell you have a problem, you're not going to believe it.
There's a couple of things that, when I look back, that played a big part in me working on healing myself. And probably the most important was taking responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Removing the blame. Everybody else's fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's everybody else's fault. It's not my fault. Couldn't be my fault.
Right.
My 2001, arrested 4 times in 6 months. One of the arrests, I had weed planted on me by the cops. That's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Shouldn't have had the ability to arrest me. The 3rd arrest, I was raided by the task force without a search warrant.
Right.
They took me into custody, right? Put me in jail. I had to post bail again. It cost me thousands of dollars, right? But they're the police,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, you're gonna
Don't
fight.
follow the rules, but but the truth being is that, for me to have been able to get through that, I had to change and alter my perspective of it.
Right.
I had to change my perspective. I had to look at things, I had to look at the world differently. I could say today, in wholehearted honesty, that I am grateful for those cops.
Oh yeah, I bet.
They planted on me, so what? I wouldn't have been in the position if I hadn't been doing what I was doing anyways.
Right.
The task force that raided me definitely would not have been that position if I hadn't been doing what I was doing.
Right.
And so there's where the responsibility comes into play. But that was the first step to it all for me.
Mm-hmm.
Before I did that, I felt imprisoned. And yeah, I was in custody, but freedom is something that is actually an internal process. It's internal freedom. You can be locked up in the most maximum security prison possible, and you can still feel free.
Oh,
His
yeah.
freedom is not
It's
anything
within.
external, that it all comes from within. And I realized that. That's what I learned at that time was, until I basically took responsibility and said, you know what, this is me. It's not my parents' fault. It's not God's fault. It's always God's fault, right?
Right. It's always God's fault.
And-
Daddy didn't love me enough. Mom didn't give me enough hugs.
Right, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we all have our stories. We all have stories of some trauma that happened in our lives and some that we may not have even faced, right? That are still kind of hidden behind that memory wall, right?
Yeah.
And but in the end of the day, the choices are ours, regardless of what happened to us. The choices are ours, and we have to fight through them. And
Absolutely.
quitting drugs, if somebody has been sober for longer than 3 months, pat them on the back, because they are really working through a whole body, fight against their own body, a fight against their own mind, and they're working so hard towards a better life for themselves. And don't punish them when they fall flat on their feet. I mean, keep your distance in the sense of, I'm not going to enable you, right? But don't kick them when they're already down.
Right.
It's just that one step forward to getting better, right?
And the truth is I mean, they're never going to get better unless they decide,
Right.
unless they make the decision. But pain helps.
It does.
The title of my book, Pain, Failure, and Misery, are the stepping stones to success. Without pain, I wouldn't know pleasure,
Right.
right? Without failures, I wouldn't know success.
Right.
And, and obviously, misery is optional, but failure doesn't even exist either unless you give up. And that was my story. And I trust me, I felt like a failure, and having 11 years clean and sober, I've been program director,
Absolutely.
executive director, own program. I was, alternative sentencing, working with the judges, the DAs, became friends with the district attorney who was trying to send me to prison for 7 years, 11 years earlier.
Well, and I had 17 years of sobriety, 3 kids, and I don't really even know why I trusted that it was just going to be a weekend thing, and
Manipulation.
yeah, that's a whole other Oprah that we can talk about later. But it's.
Oh, yeah, I got a story for everyone. We're not going to touch on that today, but I definitely got some good stories on that one.
We're never. It doesn't matter how much time has passed from your original addiction, right?
Right.
You're very vulnerable to forgetting the pain that was caused, because you can go 11 years and do amazing.
Yeah.
And one little trip, one little accidental fall, and you're right back to where you started at square one, right?
Absolutely.
I'm very fortunate that I didn't lose my children, that I was strong enough inside me, loved myself and my kids enough to know I had to get out of the situation I was in, to be able to gather my family around and say, okay, there's a problem here, Mom, Dad, I'm moving back home, even though I didn't physically move back home, but closer to home.
Yep.
So and people who don't know me would never have a clue. They see me as, an independent, strong woman with a good career and all that. And they see you, intelligent, having, able to teach a class and having getting all this exciting podcasts and radio stations and stuff like that. If we had never told our story of survival, of being able to get past these addictions, they wouldn't know just by looking at us, right?
Absolutely. When we look at, addiction is powerful, right? It's very, very powerful. And those that, are really struggling with it, there's not always an easy way to go about doing this. Courage. Sometimes you got to just go and just grab on, hold on, don't let go. Just grab on to somebody. We were talking to Sam before here, and we were talking about the a support, having people,
Right.
good people that are there for you, that can help you, that can help guide you. I want to mention too real quick that, anybody can always reach me. My email address is emccoy@highwallclean.org, or also recoveryecosystem@gmail.com. Probably have a whole bunch of other emails, but
He has about like 20 of them. But they all become junk
I
mail
only
after
check a few of them, but people can always reach out to me, if they just need somebody to talk to, but it is a difficult task, but it is possible. And it's one of the things that I love to show, even with my podcast, High Wall Clean, is having people on there that have been through it, that have been dragged through the depths of hell, that are now standing tall with their head held high. I'm working on having some guests here. Hopefully I'm going to get Jeremy Jackson out here. I've been talking to him. He was the child on Baywatch, David Hasselhoff's son. And so I'm looking for some, lineup guests that I'm ultimately going to have out here, but partly again to show that it is possible.
It is. And you don't need a lot of money. You don't
No.
need fame.
No.
I mean, you can get through it.
Yeah.
You can get through it. Absolutely. Right. And I don't mean to be partial because I am his wife, but really some really great stories have come out of your podcast that I've listened to and listened to the, the person you're interviewing, and just amazing stories of survival. So it's not even about addiction. It's just being able to survive the world that we're living in with the stuff that has happened to us in our upbringing, in our lives, in the things that we are harder on ourselves mentally than anybody could be on ourselves, right? And so we've all had to learn to love ourselves. And you don't have to be a recovering drug addict to learn to love yourself, right?
And if you are out there struggling, right, and if you have a chemical dependency issue, you could possibly be the luckiest person in the world, because you may get an opportunity to work on things that other people don't.
Right.
You may get an opportunity to look within yourself and to become a better, healthier person than the people out there that don't have those problems.
That may not have the addiction, but want to ignore any of their mental health.
100%.
Right.
And the truth, we could do another whole show on, behavioral addictions. Even things outside. Everybody does something in extreme. I mean, that's just the nature of it. But you can move into, workaholics.
Eric.
You workaholics. Yes, I do that. Gambling addicts, sex addicts. You got the shopaholics, the hoarders,
overeating, hoarders.
The eating disorders. All of these different things, and honestly, they're all the same. And actually, if you look at it physiologically, same part of the brain.
Right.
You are doing exactly the same thing. You're just doing it with the behavior versus a chemical. And behavioral addictions, you look it up in the DSM-5, they are exactly the same. All the symptoms, exactly the same, except one, tissue dependency. The only difference. You won't become tissue dependent on gambling.
No.
But it will destroy your life.
It will.
And so, it's absolutely, but there is hope. There is hope. And there are good programs out there. I am somebody that I don't believe in solutions. I believe in ideas. Solutions get us stuck. Once I find a solution, there's no point in looking any further because we've got the solution. The problem with that is everybody's different.
Right.
People learn differently. People experience things differently. People have different belief systems and different ideas, and they work differently. And so there's all kinds of different, don't get stuck on just there's only one thing.
Right. Well, and that's another thing. I got clean and sober without a program. Right. You got a program. I did it without a program. Neither one is right or wrong. Right. But I had support. Right. I had somebody I can go to and talk to when I was feeling like, okay, I'm gonna lose it. Right.
That's the key.
So and so that's what I was gonna say. So for those of you who are listening that either are an addict or a family member of an addict or something like that, and they just don't want to do the program, or they just are not good with the going to the NA meetings or the AA meetings or whatever program that's around them, just find them that support, that one or two people they can just pick up at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm having a hard day. I am craving really bad or whatever. Or can we just go get coffee? Like, I don't even want to talk about getting clean. I just want to talk to somebody because that camaraderie. Thank you. I can never say that right. I know what it means, but I can't say it. That right there is so valuable. And that's why we're having so many problems now, because so many people were isolated at home. They were, didn't have that connection. And no matter how much you are a loner, you still need that one person at least to have that connection with in order to get yourself through the hump. Right.
Yep.
So just know that there is help out there. There's people like Eric said, email him, say, hey, I want to get clean and sober, but I really don't want to do this whole group thing. What other suggestions do you have for me? And then, stuff like that.
There's all kinds of, they said statistically 40% of people in recovery have never gone to rehab nor a 12-step program. So obviously there's other options, and there's different things that you can do. One thing I want to end with too, and we're pretty much out of time here, but I was like, for those of you that are out there struggling and those of you out there hurting, I may not know you, but I love you because of the pain that you're going through, and I understand it. And and there is hope, and
don't let go of that hope. It's there.
It is.
Even when you really you can't see your hand in front of your face, it's there.
Absolutely. Well, honey, I want to thank you for doing this today.
Absolutely. Had a great time.
This was great, and we're definitely going to get you back. And I want to thank everybody for listening again to the show. What were you thinking? I'm hoping at some point in time we'll start getting some callers so we can find out what the fuck were you thinking, right? What the fuck were you thinking?
Right. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you next week.
You're listening to